have exactly $42 in my pocket and a $10 million target on my back. 5 minutes ago, I was a maid. Now, I'm the most hunted woman in Florida. The Thorne family thinks they've trapped me in this library, but they forgot one thing. I'm the one who's been handling their father's medication for 3 years. I know which of them is a killer, and I'm about to broadcast the proof to every news station in the city. If this video cuts out, you'll know they found me. They say the air in Florida is thick enough to swallow you whole, but in the master bedroom of the Thorne estate, the air didn't feel like water. It felt like ash. For 3 years, my world was exactly 15 feet wide. That was the distance from the armchair where I slept to the king-sized bed where Elias Thorne was slowly turning into a ghost. I was the help. Who came from nothing, hired to make sure a billionaire didn't die alone in a house with 42 rooms. 42 rooms. And for 3 years not a single one of his children stepped foot in this one. Marcus Thorne was too busy liquidating assets in Miami. Lydia Thorne was too busy curated her Instagram life from a yacht in Cabo. They called once a month not to ask how their father was breathing, but to ask if the paperwork was in order. They didn't see the way Elias's hands shook when he tried to hold a glass of water. They didn't see the way he cried at 4 a.m. because the morphine couldn't reach the part of his soul that was breaking. I saw it. I held his hand. I was the one who promised him that when the end came, it would be quiet. 3 days ago, the end came. The house was suddenly full. It's funny how death acts like a dinner bell for vultures. The silence I had protected for 3 years was shattered by the clicking of Lydia's 6-inch stilettos on the marble floors and Marcus's loud, aggressive voice on his cell phone, already talking to decorators about gutting the place. They didn't even wait for the body to be cold. "Elena, dear," Lydia said to me that morning. She didn't look at me. She was looking at her reflection in a gold leaf mirror, adjusting a black veil. "You've been adequate. Truly. But we'll be taking it from here. You can have your things out by noon, right? We wouldn't want any overlap with the new security team." Adequate. 3 years of cleaning up blood, bile and tears. 3 years of being the only person who knew that Elias Thorne liked his tea with 2 sugars and a sprig of mint. And I was adequate. I just nodded. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that in the briefcase of Mr. Sterling, the family attorney, sat a document that was about to turn their perfect lives into a pile of rubble. The library felt like a tomb. Marcus sat in Elias's leather chair, the one he was never allowed to touch while the old man was alive. He was pouring a glass of 30-year-old Macallan, a smug grin plastered on his face. Lydia sat opposite him, checking her watch, looking like she was bored at a theater performance. I stood in the corner, shadowed, just the way they liked me. "Can we get on with this, Sterling?" Marcus barked. "I've got a closing in Miami at 4, and the jet is fueled." Mr. Sterling didn't look up. He was an old-school lawyer, the kind who believed in the theater of the law. He moved slowly, placing his spectacles on the bridge of his nose. "Elias Thorne was a man of specific tastes," Sterling began, his voice gravelly, "and even more specific loyalties." Lydia scoffed. "We know the drill. The estate is split 50/50, the charities get a tax-deductible pittance, and we sell the vineyard. Just read the numbers." "Actually," Sterling said, and for the first time he looked at me, "there was an amendment, signed and witnessed 3 months ago. In this very room." Marcus froze with the glass halfway to his lips. "An amendment?" The old man was out of his mind 3 months ago. He was on enough meds to kill a horse. "He was of sound mind, Marcus," Sterling replied coldly. "I made sure of that. To my son, Marcus," Sterling read, "I leave the sum of $50,000. This is to be used solely for the purpose of paying off your gambling debts in Atlantic City. Not a penny more. You have spent your life trying to shorten mine. Now you can learn to live yours without my shadow." Marcus's face turned a shade of purple I'd only seen on bruised fruit. $50,000? Marcus whispered. "That's a joke. He's worth hundreds of millions. Where is the rest? Where is the real estate? The liquid capital?" Sterling turned the page. "To my daughter, Lydia. I leave the Thorne family jewelry, every piece. Because you have always valued things that shine over things that feel. May they keep you warm at night, because I know your heart won't." Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "The jewelry? That's barely $2 million in assets. Where is the cash, Sterling? Where is the 10 million in the offshore account? This was it. The moment the air left the room, Sterling looked at me again. And finally he read, his voice gaining strength. For the only person who didn't look at me like a bank account. For the woman who gave me 3 years of peace when my own blood gave me nothing but headaches. I leave the remainder of my liquid assets, totaling $10 million, and the deed to the Florida estate to Elena Vance. I felt Marcus's gaze before I saw it. It wasn't just anger. It was a predatory, soul-shattering rage. You. Marcus breathed, the glass finally slipping from his fingers. Do you hear that? That's the sound of a life breaking. Right now, Marcus is looking at me like I'm a ghost, but he's the one who's dead inside. If you're watching this and you know that loyalty is worth more than gold, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't be like Marcus. Don't wait until you've lost everything to realize who actually cared for you. And if you won't subscribe, leave a comment below. Tell me why you think the vultures deserve to win. I want to hear your excuse. Lydia was the first to find her voice. This is fraud. She yelled, lunging toward the desk. She manipulated him. Look at her. She's a nobody. A girl from a trailer park who we brought in out of pity. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded in front of me. I remembered Elias's voice in my ear from a month ago. Elena, they will come for you with teeth bared. Do not blink. If you blink, they'll know they can hurt you. I didn't blink. The signature is notarized, Lydia, Sterling said, his voice unmoved. The medical evaluations are attached. Your father was perfectly aware of what he was doing. He felt that the $10 million would be better spent on someone who actually knew his middle name. Marcus stood up. He was 6'4" and built like a wall. He stepped toward me, his shadow falling over my face. You think you're walking out of here with my money? He hissed. You think you're sleeping in my father's bed in this house? You're a parasite, Elena. And I've spent my whole career removing parasites. It's not your money, Marcus, I said. My voice was small, but it didn't shake. It was his. And now, it's mine. We'll see about that, Marcus whispered. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of expensive peat and ancient malice. Florida has laws, Elena. Laws about undue influence. Laws about elder abuse. By the time I'm done with you, you won't just be poor again. You'll be in a jumpsuit that matches your orange hair. He turned to his sister. Lydia, call Miller. Tell him we're filing for an emergency injunction. Nobody touches a cent of that money. Lydia was already on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She looked at me with a smile that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the smile of a loser. It was the smile of someone who had just found a new hobby, destroying me. As they marched out of the library, Marcus stopped at the door. He didn't look back. Enjoy the house for the next hour, Elena, he said. Because by sunset, the locks are being changed. And if I find you on the property, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I was alone in the library. $10 million on paper. But as I looked at the shattered glass on the floor, I realized I wasn't rich. I was a target. I walked over to Elias's desk. My heart was drumming against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached for the bottom drawer, the one Elias told me about. The one with the blue folder. My hand touched the handle. I pulled. It was locked. And that's when I heard the sirens turning into the driveway. They weren't waiting for sunset. The war hadn't just started. I was already losing. They think they've trapped me. They think a girl like me doesn't know how to fight people with millions in their war chest. But Elias Thorne didn't just leave me money. He left me a map. And if I can just get this drawer open before the police break down that door, I might just show them what a parasite can really do. Panic is a cold liquid. It starts in your stomach and moves to your limbs until you're too heavy to move, too frozen to breathe. The sirens weren't just a warning. They were a death knell. I stood in that library, the $10 million was still sitting on the desk like a piece of useless scrap paper, and I realized how naive I had been. I thought a signature made me powerful. I forgot that in this zip code, power isn't a document. Power is the ability to call the chief of police and have a problem removed before lunch. Elena Vance. Stay where you are. Hands where we can see them. I looked at the desk drawer again. The blue folder. The key was nowhere to be found. I tugged at the handle, the wood groaning under my grip, but it held firm. Elias. You told me to wait until they thought they won. But they're winning now. They're winning before I've even had a chance to breathe. I backed away from the desk as 3 officers stormed the library. They didn't look like they were here to ask questions. They looked like they were here for a high-profile caller. And behind them, standing in the doorway like a queen watching an execution, was Lydia. She had a tissue pressed to her eyes, but her gaze was as sharp as a razor blade. "That's her," Lydia whimpered, her voice a choreographed masterpiece of fake grief. "She's the one." My father was so confused. She kept him isolated. We tried to see him, we tried to help, but she threatened us. She drugged him. "Please, just get her out of his house." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the officers about the 3 years I spent scrubbing Lydia's father's vomit off the floor while she was in Aspen. I wanted to tell them about the isolation, how I begged the children to visit for Christmas and was told, "Send a photo, we're busy." But the words died in my throat. Because when I looked at the lead officer, I saw the way he looked at Lydia. Respect, deference, fear. Then he looked at me. And he saw a criminal. "Miss Vance, you're under arrest for elder financial exploitation and suspected felony neglect," the officer said. The cold steel bit into my wrists. I didn't fight. If I fought, they'd add resisting to the list. I just looked at Lydia. "He's watching you, Lydia," I said. My voice was a ghost's rasp. "He knew you'd do this." Lydia's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flickered with a raw, ugly hatred. Then she leaned in, her perfume something expensive and floral clogging my senses. "He's dead. Elena," she whispered so low only I could hear. "And by the time I'm done, you'll wish you were too. The Sarasota County Jail doesn't care about $10 million wills." To them, I was just another grifter who tried to climb the social ladder and fell off. I sat in that room for 6 hours. No phone call. No lawyer. Just the buzzing of that light and the memory of the blue folder I had failed to retrieve. The weight of it started to sink in. They had frozen the estate. Sterling, the lawyer, couldn't help me. He had been served with a conflict of interest notice by Marcus's legal team. I had no money. No family. I was a girl with a public defender and a mountain of lies stacked against me. The door opened. It wasn't an officer. It was Marcus. He looked impeccable, not a hair out of place. He sat down across from me and placed a single piece of paper on the table. "It's a confession, Elena," Marcus said smoothly. He pushed a pen toward me. "Sign it. Admit that you coerced my father. Admit that you used his dementia to manipulate the will. Do that, and I'll make sure the charges are dropped to a misdemeanor. You'll serve 6 months and then you're free to go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Marcus. "He didn't have dementia, Marcus," I said, my voice gaining a strength that surprised even me. "He was dying, but he was sharper than you'll ever be. He knew you were stealing from the company. He knew about the loans you took that were never paid back." Marcus's jaw tightened. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating violence in his eyes. "You have no proof," he said. "The blue folder," I replied. I was bluffing. I didn't know what was in it, but I saw the way his pupils dilated at the mention of it. "The desk is gone, Elena," Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "I had the entire library cleared out an hour ago. Anything in that desk is currently being reduced to ash in the mansion's incinerator." My heart stopped. The folder. The map. The only thing Elias left me to fight back with. Was gone. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're nothing. You're a footnote in the Thorn history. Sign the paper, or I'll make sure you never see the sun again." I reached for the pen. My fingers brushed the plastic. Marcus leaned in, a victory smirk forming on his thin lips. He thought he had me. He thought the caretaker was finally broken. But then, I remembered the way Elias used to play chess. He always said, "Elena, never protect your queen at the expense of your king. Sometimes, you have to lose your most valuable piece to realize the opponent has walked into a trap they can't see." "No," I said. Marcus blinked. "No? I won't sign it," I said, standing up as much as the waist chains would allow. "Because you're lying, Marcus. You didn't burn that desk. You're too greedy. You're terrified there's something in there that identifies where the rest of the money is, the money you haven't found yet." I didn't know if there was more money. I was gambling with my life. Marcus stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "You're going to rot, Elena. I'll see to it personally." He stormed out, the heavy door echoing like a gunshot. I was alone again. But as I sat there, a strange sense of peace washed over me. Marcus was scared. If he wasn't scared, he wouldn't have come here himself. He would have sent a lackey. A woman in a plain suit walked in. She didn't look like a cop. She looked like a wolf in a librarian's clothing. She sat down and slid a business card across the table. Sarah Vance. Private Investigations. Your last name is Vance? I whispered. No relation, she said, her voice like sandpaper. But I've been on Elias Thorne's payroll for 2 years. He told me that on the day you were arrested, I should come and give you a message. My heart hammered. A message? He knew they'd freeze the assets. He knew they'd try to frame you. He said the $10 million in the will was the rabbit, the thing the hounds would chase so they didn't see the lion coming. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. The blue folder wasn't in the desk, Elena. He knew Marcus would burn the house down to find it. He hid it in the one place Marcus Thorne would never go, the one place he thinks is beneath him. I stared at her, the breath catching in my throat. Where? In your mother's old sewing box. The one Marcus threw in the trash 3 years ago. Only. It didn't stay in the trash. Sarah Vance, no relation. But a godsend didn't just bring a message. She brought a way out. By some miracle, or perhaps by Elias's pre-planned design, the medical negligence charges wouldn't stick. The toxicology report came back clean. Elias had died of natural causes, just as the cancer intended. I was released on bail at 4 a.m. No cameras. No fanfare. Just me, standing on the sidewalk of a city that suddenly felt like a battlefield. My bank accounts were still frozen. My apartment had been tossed likely by Marcus's security team, and I had exactly $42 in my pocket. I was a millionaire on paper and a beggar on the street. Where are we going? I asked as I climbed into Sarah's battered black sedan. To the only place Marcus Thorne hasn't looked, Sarah said, shifting the car into gear. Because to Marcus, poverty is a disease. He won't go near anything that reminds him of it. We drove 3 hours north, away from the glitz of the Florida coast and into the humid, moss-draped heart of the state. We stopped at a rusted storage facility in a town that didn't even have a stoplight. Sarah pointed to a single, lonely unit. Inside was a pile of what looked like junk, old blankets, a chipped lamp, and a faded wooden box. My mother's sewing box. I remembered the day Marcus had thrown it out. It was my second week on the job. He had seen it in my small staff quarters and told me that clutter is for the lower classes. He had tossed it into the industrial bin behind the mansion. I had cried for hours. I thought it was gone forever. I knelt in the dust, as I touched the wood. Elias pulled it out of the trash himself, Sarah whispered. He told me he'd never seen a woman value a box of thread more than his daughter valued a diamond necklace. That was the day he decided he could trust you. I opened the lid. The smell of lavender and old cedar hit me so hard I almost lost my breath. Underneath the spools of blue and red thread, tucked beneath a false bottom, was the blue folder. I opened it. I expected to find more money, bank account numbers, offshore codes, maybe a map to a hidden safe. But Elias Thorne was a much more dangerous man than I realized. Inside were photographs. Photographs of Marcus Thorne meeting with a man known to the FBI as a fixer for the South Florida cartels. There were ledger entries for a shell company Marcus had used to launder money through his father's real estate developments. Marcus hadn't just been spending his father's money, he had been cannibalizing the entire legacy to cover a hole he'd dug with the mob. He didn't just leave me a fortune, I whispered. He left me a guillotine. I looked at Sarah. Can we leak this? If you leak it now, Sarah said, Marcus will flee. Or worse, he'll have you killed before the first headline hits the press. No. Elias wanted you to play the long game. You don't just cut the head off the snake, Elena. You make the snake starve until it eats its own tail. We drove back toward the coast. I didn't go to the mansion. I didn't go to my trashed apartment. I went to a small, dingy motel under a fake name. I sat on the edge of the bed, the blue folder spread out before me. It was a text from an unknown number. The hearing to permanently void the will is in 72 hours. Enjoy the motel, Elena. It's better than the prison cell you're headed for. Marcus. He was still watching. He thought I was hiding, shivering in fear. He didn't know I was staring at a photo of him handing a briefcase to a criminal in a parking garage. I picked up the phone. I called the one person Marcus Thorne feared more than his father, his biggest rival, Julian Vane. Mr. Vane? I said into the receiver. You don't know me. But I have something that belongs to you. Or rather, something that will make sure Marcus Thorne never takes another contract in this state again. I felt it then. The shift. The moment the caretaker died and the executor was born. They wanted to treat me like trash? Fine. I would show them that even trash can start a fire that burns a mansion to the ground. I looked at the final page of the blue folder. There was a handwritten note from Elias. Elena, the 10 million is just the beginning. If you're brave enough to finish what they started, look at the GPS coordinates on the back of this page. That's where the real Thorne legacy is buried. I flipped the page. My heart stopped. The coordinates weren't for a bank. They were for the Thorne family cemetery. Why would he lead me to a grave? I've always been afraid of cemeteries. My mother used to say they were the only places where the truth couldn't be silenced by lies. But as I drove through the iron gates of the Thorne family plot at 2 a.m., I wasn't afraid of the ghosts. I was afraid of what the living had done to the dead. The Florida rain was turning the earth into a soup of gray mud. Sarah stayed in the car, her headlights cutting through the mist like two accusatory eyes. I walked alone, my boots sinking into the sodden grass, until I reached the massive marble monument that bore the name Thorne. Elias wasn't here yet. His body was still being held in a morgue, a pawn in Marcus's legal games. But the plot next to his was freshly disturbed. It was supposed to be empty, reserved for the day Lydia or Marcus finally joined their father. I didn't have a shovel. I used my bare hands, clawing at the loose dirt near the base of the headstone. The mud got under my fingernails, staining my skin, but I didn't care. I felt like I was digging for my own soul. 6 inches down, I hit something. A small, waterproof pelican case. I pulled it out. Inside, there was a digital recorder and a stack of medical records from a clinic in Switzerland. I opened the records first. My eyes scanned the Latin terms, the dates, the signatures. It was Marcus's. 10 years ago, Marcus Thorne had been diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition. He was dying. Slowly. His real estate empire wasn't built on genius. It was built on a desperate, frantic scramble to secure a legacy before his body failed him. But that wasn't the secret. The secret was the digital recorder. I pressed play.
Elena, if you're hearing this, it means Marcus has already tried to put you in a cage. I'm sorry I left you with such a burden, but I had to know if you were strong enough to carry the truth. The $10 million I left you, it's not an inheritance, it's a bounty. My son didn't just steal from me. He killed my wife. He killed your mother's employer, Elena. The accident 20 years ago on the Thorne yacht? It wasn't an accident. Marcus sabotaged the engine for the insurance money to pay off his first major debt. He let her drown to save his bank account. And God help me, I covered it up to save the family name. Until now.
The recorder fell from my hand into the mud. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. My mother didn't just work for the Thornes, she had died in their service. I was told it was a tragic malfunction, a freak storm. But all this time, I had been caring for the man who protected the monster who killed her. I looked up at the mansion on the hill, silhouetted against a flash of lightning. For 3 years, I had treated Elias like a grandfather. I had loved him, and he had used that love to bait a trap for his own son, using my mother's death as the ultimate currency. You old fox, I whispered, the rain washing the tears and mud from my face. You didn't want justice. You wanted revenge. And you knew I was the only one with nothing left to lose. Elena. Get in the car. Sarah's voice screamed through the wind. I looked toward the gate. A set of high beams was tearing through the cemetery. Not the police. A black SUV. Marcus's fixers. They hadn't been watching the motels, they had been watching the graves. We didn't drive toward the city. Sarah took the back roads, the car fishtailing on the slick pavement. Behind us, the SUV was a relentless shadow. Gain ground. They're going to ram us. Sarah yelled. Keep driving. I screamed back, clutching the pelican case to my chest. They won't kill us here. They need what's in this box. But I was wrong. Marcus didn't want the box. He wanted the secret buried. The SUV clipped our rear bumper. The car spun. I saw the world flip, trees, rain, sky, mud all blurring into a chaotic mess of glass and steel. I woke up upside down. The smell of gasoline was thick in the air. My head was throbbing, a warm trickle of blood running into my eye. Sarah was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I heard a car door open. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the gravel. I saw his shoes first. Handmade Italian leather. Marcus Thorne stepped into the light of the overturned car's flickering headlights. He looked down at me, and he wasn't angry anymore. He looked relieved. "You should have taken the 50,000 and ran, Elena," he said, reaching into the wreckage for the Pelican case. "Now, you're just going to be another unfortunate accident in the Thorne family history." He pulled the case out. He opened it. But as he looked inside, his face went pale. The digital recorder was gone. I had tucked it into my waistband the second the car started to spin. "Looking for this?" I choked out, coughing up the metallic taste of blood. I held up my phone. I hadn't just been recording, I had been streaming. Marcus lunged for me, his hands reaching through the broken glass for my throat. But then, the sound of a dozen sirens began to echo through the trees. "It's over, Marcus," I whispered. But as he looked at the approaching lights, he didn't run. He smiled. "You think those cops are here for me, Elena? I told you. I own this city." The first thing I smelled was antiseptic. The second thing I felt was the weight of a realization. I was still alive. I opened my eyes. The room was white, blindingly white. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and my ribs screamed with every breath. I reached for my waist. My hand hit bandages, the phone, the recorder. Looking for these? I turned my head slowly, painfully. Sarah Vance was sitting in a chair by the window. She had a bandage on her forehead and her arm was in a sling, but her eyes were wide awake. She held up my phone. The screen was shattered, but the upload was complete. The stream cut out a few seconds after the sirens appeared. Sarah said, her voice low. But it was enough. The internet doesn't forget, Elena. Especially when it involves a thorn. Before I could speak, two men in suits entered. They were state investigators. They looked at Sarah, then at me, with the kind of eyes that see through skin and bone. "Miss Vance," the taller one said, pulling out a badge. "I'm Agent Miller. We've seen the video. We've seen the confession Marcus Thorne allegedly made at the scene." "Allegedly?" I choked out. He was standing over me. He had the case. He admitted everything. Agent Miller exchanged a look with his partner. "The problem, Miss Vance, is that Marcus Thorne wasn't at the scene when the first responders arrived. According to 3 witnesses and a dozen time-stamped security photos, Mr. Thorne was at a charity gala in Palm Beach the entire night." I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's impossible." "He was there. I felt his breath. I saw his shoes." "We're not saying you didn't see someone," Miller said, his voice maddeningly calm. "But the legal reality is that Marcus Thorne has an ironclad alibi, and the Pelican case you recovered? It was empty when we found it on the side of the road. He was doing it again. The Thorne machine was moving. They hadn't just cleaned the crime scene, they had rewritten the night. Marcus hadn't run, he had replaced himself. But the stream," I started. "The stream shows a man in a dark coat whose face is obscured by shadows and rain," Miller interrupted. "In a court of law, that's not Marcus Thorne. That's a ghost." They left the room, leaving me in a silence that felt like a coffin. I looked at Sarah. "He's going to win, isn't he?" I whispered. "He's going to erase my mother, erase Elias, and erase me." Sarah didn't answer right away. She waited until the footsteps in the hallway faded. Then she stood up, walked over to my bed, and pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "They missed something," she said. When Marcus or whoever that was pulled the Pelican case out of the car, he was so focused on the recorder that he didn't notice this had fallen into the floorboards. It was a small, laminated card, an access pass. But it wasn't for a bank or a mansion. It was for the Thorne Marine Research Center, a private facility on the Florida Keys that had been shut down for environmental reasons 5 years ago. "Elias didn't just give you a bounty, Elena," Sarah whispered. "He gave you a location. Marcus is terrified of that recorder because it links him to your mother's death. But he's terrified of this facility because it's where the rest of the money is. Not in cash. In data. I looked at the card. My mind flashed back to Elias's final weeks. He had kept talking about the deep. I thought he was hallucinating about the ocean. I thought he was just a dying man dreaming of the water. But he wasn't dreaming. He was pointing. "We're going," I said, trying to sit up. The pain was a white-hot spike in my side, but I pushed through it. "You can barely walk," Sarah protested. "Then find me a wheelchair," I snapped. "Marcus thinks he's erased the night. He thinks he's a ghost." "Fine. I'm going to go to the one place where ghosts still have a voice." We slipped out of the hospital through the service entrance. Sarah had a friend, one of Elias's old contacts, who provided a car that didn't have a GPS tracker. As we drove south toward the Keys, I watched the Florida coastline blur past. The neon signs of Miami looked like predatory eyes. I realized then that I wasn't the girl who changed bandages anymore. I wasn't the adequate help. I was the only thing standing between Marcus Thorne and total immunity. "Sarah," I said, looking at the access card. "If my mother was on that yacht, and Marcus sabotaged it, why did Elias cover it up? Why wait until he was dead to give me the truth?" Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Because Elias wasn't a saint, Elena. He was a father. He spent 20 years trying to fix Marcus. He thought he could shame him into being a better man. It was only when he realized Marcus was poisoning him that he finally gave up on the bloodline." My blood turned to ice. Marcus was poisoning Elias. The cancer was assisted, Elena. Elias found the traces in his own blood work months ago. He knew his son was killing him for the inheritance. That's why he left it all to you. It wasn't just a gift. It was a slap in the face from beyond the grave. We reached the gates of the Marine Research Center just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The facility looked abandoned, rusted fences, shattered windows, and a no trespassing sign that looked like a warning from a past life. But as I swiped the card against the rusted reader, the light didn't turn red. It turned green. And from deep beneath the ground, I heard the sound of heavy machinery waking up. Marcus isn't just laundering money here. He's hiding something that's still breathing. The green light on the reader didn't just open a door. It opened a world I wasn't prepared for. Inside the Thorne Marine Research Center, the humidity of the Florida Keys disappeared, replaced by a dry, sterile chill. This place wasn't abandoned. The dust on the floor was thin, and the air smelled of ozone and expensive cooling systems. This was Marcus's real office. The mansion was for show. This was for the soul-crushing business of staying powerful. "Elena, look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing to a rack of servers blinking in the dark. I didn't care about the computers. I was looking at the walls. Every few feet, there were framed architectural blueprints. But they weren't for buildings. They were for subsurface asset recovery. My mother had died on a yacht that supposedly sank into a trench so deep it couldn't be reached. But as I looked at these maps, I saw a red circle around the exact coordinates of the wreck. Marcus hadn't just sabotaged the boat. He had spent the last 5 years building the technology to go back down and retrieve something from it. I sat at the main terminal. My hands were shaking, but the adrenaline was acting like a splint for my broken ribs. I swiped the access card again. "Access granted, level 5, E. Thorne." He never changed the master codes, I breathed. He was so sure nobody would ever find this place that he left his father's ghost in the system. Files began to populate the screen, thousands of them. I didn't have time to read everything, so I searched for one word: siren. The name of the yacht. A video file appeared. It was dated 6 months ago. I pressed play. The footage was grainy, illuminated only by the harsh beam of a submersible's light. It was the siren. It sat on its side, covered in silt and ghost nets. The camera moved toward the master cabin. The diver reached out with a robotic arm and pulled a heavy, waterproof safe from the wreckage. "He found it," Sarah gasped. The insurance money wasn't enough. He went back for the ledgers. The physical proof of his money laundering that his father had hidden on that boat. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. For the first time since Elias died, I didn't feel like a victim. He hasn't just found them, Sarah. He's digitized them. I clicked copy all. The progress bar began to crawl. 1%. 5%. "Elena, we have to move," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on a security monitor. A car just turned into the main gate. Black SUV. 2 of them. I looked at the screen. 22%. I'm not leaving without this data, I said. If I leave now, he'll wipe the servers the moment he walks in. This is my only shot to prove he's a killer. He'll kill us before the upload finishes. I looked around the room. I saw a fire suppression override switch. I saw the cooling vents. Hide in the ventilation shaft, I told Sarah. I'm going to give him a reason to stay in the lobby. I didn't run. I walked to the main intercom system. I leaned into the microphone. Welcome home, Marcus. I was wondering when you'd show up to clean your own mess. I watched the monitor. Marcus Thorne burst through the doors, his face contorted with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated malice. He was alone. He had left his guards at the gate, thinking he could handle the caretaker himself. Elena, he spat, heaving for breath. You really are a cockroach. I should have crushed you in that hospital bed. You tried, I said, my hand hovering over the delete all button, a decoy I had set up on the second monitor. But you forgot one thing, Marcus. I spent 3 years learning how you think. You're not a genius. You're just a man who's terrified of being poor. He stepped toward the glass partition of the control room. He looked at the screen, the one showing the siren footage. His eyes went wide. You think that's enough to stop me? He laughed, though the sound was hollow. That's a grainy video of a wreck. It proves nothing. It proves you knew where the boat was, I said. And it proves you've been lying to the SEC for a decade. But look at the other screen, Marcus. I pointed to the upload bar. 98%. 99%. Transfer complete. I pulled the flash drive from the port and held it up. This isn't going to the police, I said. It's going to your creditors. All those men you owe money to. The ones who think you have assets you don't. They're going to find out today that the Thorne Empire is a hollow shell. The look on his face was worth every broken bone. It was the look of a man watching his throne turn into a pile of salt. Give me that drive, he whispered, reaching for his jacket pocket. Marcus pulled a small, black semi-automatic from his pocket. He leveled it at my chest. The drive, Elena. Or you join your mother in the deep. I looked at him, and for the first time, I smiled. You can't kill me, Marcus. Because if my heart rate stops, the rest of the files are programmed to go public on every social media platform in the world. Elias didn't just give me a bounty. He gave me a dead man's switch. Marcus froze. His finger took up the slack on the trigger. You're bluffing, he whispered. Try me. Power is a funny thing. We think it's held in hands, in gold, or in the barrels of guns. But real power is the thing you don't see coming. It's the hand on your shoulder you thought was a friend's, right before it pushes you off the ledge. Marcus's hand was shaking. The barrel of the semi-automatic was leveled directly at my heart. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, reflecting the blue light of the server racks. He was a man cornered, and a cornered Thorne is the most dangerous animal in Florida. The dead man's switch, Marcus rasped, his voice breaking. My father wouldn't have given that to you. He didn't trust anyone that much. Not even the girl who wiped his chin. He didn't trust me, Marcus, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the blood thumping in my ears. He hated you. That was enough. Lower the gun, Marcus. The voice didn't come from me, and it didn't come from Sarah in the vents. The heavy steel door at the back of the control room hissed open. I turned my head just enough to see a figure step out of the shadows. It was Mr. Sterling, the family attorney. He looked exactly as he did the day of the will reading, stern, expensive, and utterly unmoved by the chaos. He held a tablet in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other. Sterling? Marcus breathed, his eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope. Thank God. Get this bitch out of here. She's got the drive. She's trying to ruin everything. Sterling didn't look at Marcus. He looked at me. There was no pity in his eyes. There wasn't even malice. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a man who had been playing a game for 40 years while everyone else was just living their lives. You did well, Elena, Sterling said. His voice was smooth like silk over a blade. Elias was right about you. You have a certain resilience. You found the facility. You extracted the data. You even survived Marcus's clumsy attempt at a car accident. I don't understand, I whispered. You're on his side? You're helping him? Helping Marcus? Sterling laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Marcus is a failure. He's a parasite that's finished bleeding the host. I've spent 30 years keeping this family out of prison, watching them squander a fortune I helped build. Do you really think I'd let a man like Marcus destroy my life's work? Marcus stepped forward. Sterling, what are you talking about? I'm the heir. Marcus didn't even have time to scream. The bullet hit him in the thigh. He collapsed, the gun skittering across the floor. He clutched his leg, gasping, his face turning a ghostly white. You're a liability, Marcus, Sterling said, not even looking down at him. He turned back to me. Elias knew Marcus would try to kill you, Elena. That was the point. He needed a catalyst. He needed someone to bypass the security protocols that even I couldn't crack. Level 5 access requires a biometric stress trigger, a specific heart rate and vocal pattern that only you, in your state of grief and terror, could provide. My stomach turned. I looked at the flash drive in my hand. It wasn't just data. It was the key to the entire Thorn offshore network, the real money. The billions, not just the 10 million. The will was a lie, I whispered. The 10 million was just bait. Exactly, Sterling said, stepping closer. Elias knew you'd fight for it. He knew your moral compass would lead you right here. And now that you've opened the door, I'll take the drive, Elena. I looked toward the ventilation shaft, praying Sarah was hearing this. But as if reading my mind, Sterling tapped his tablet. On the security monitor I saw the vent. I saw Sarah. She wasn't hiding. She was standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 of Sterling's private security guards. She didn't look like a prisoner. She was holding a check. Sarah? I whispered, the word feeling like glass in my throat. Sarah looked into the camera. Her face was a mask of cold indifference. I'm sorry, Elena. But I've got kids. And Sterling pays a lot more than a dead man's promise. The world didn't just tilt. It shattered. The private investigator. The Vance name. The sewing box. It was all a setup. A carefully constructed play to make me feel like I was the hero of my own story, when I was really just the locksmith for a monster I never saw coming. Sterling held out his hand. The drive, Elena. Give it to me and I'll let you walk out of here. I'll even let you keep the 10 million. It's a rounding error to me now. And if I don't? Sterling looked at Marcus, who was bleeding out on the floor, then back at me. Then you'll stay here, permanently. Along with the brother and sister who disappeared in a tragic facility accident. The narrative is already written, Elena. You're the disgruntled caretaker who went off the deep end. I looked at the drive. Then I looked at the server rack behind Sterling. You're right, Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The narrative is written. But you forgot one thing about Elias. What's that? He taught me how to play chess. And he always said, the most dangerous piece on the board isn't the queen. It's the pawn that everyone ignores until it reaches the other side. I didn't give him the drive. I threw it directly into the high-voltage cooling intake of the main server. If I can't have the truth, I screamed over the alarms, no one gets the money. They say when you lose everything, you're finally free. But they don't tell you about the cold. The kind of cold that settles in your bones when you realize that every kindness you've ever known was a calculated move on a board you didn't even know existed. The server room was a graveyard of smoke. The blue flash from the intake had blinded me for a second, but the sound of Sterling's scream was better than any sight. He wasn't screaming in pain. He was screaming in greed. The drive, the physical key to billions, was a melted lump of silicon and plastic. You stupid girl, Sterling hissed. The polished mask of the elite attorney had finally cracked. His face was twisted, his eyes wide with a manic desperation. He lunged toward the smoking server, his hands reaching for the charred remains as if he could pull the data back out of the ether. I didn't wait. I didn't watch him mourn his money. I moved. I didn't go for the main exit. I knew Sarah's guards would be there. I knew the safe way out was a trap. Instead, I went deeper. I went toward the subsurface asset recovery bay, the place where the submersible sat, waiting for a master who was currently bleeding out in the lobby. I found a service tunnel, narrow and slick with condensation. My ribs felt like they were being crushed by a vice, and every step was a gamble with consciousness. I collapsed against the damp concrete wall, miles away from the facility's heart. I was in a drainage pipe that emptied into the mangroves of the Florida Keys. I was covered in soot, blood, and the ashes of a billionaire's legacy. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around something cold, something heavy. Sterling thought I threw the drive. He saw the flash. He saw the object fly into the intake. But he didn't see what I actually threw. I had swapped it. In that split second when the alarms first went off, I threw my mother's old, silver thimble, the one I'd kept in my pocket since I pulled it from the sewing box. In the strobe light of the server room, one small, metallic object looks exactly like another. The drive was still in my hand. But I couldn't use it. Not yet. If I plugged it in anywhere, Sterling's trackers would find me in minutes. I didn't need a computer. I needed a ghost. I spent 3 days in the Everglades. I didn't stay in motels. I stayed in the places Marcus and Sterling wouldn't dare put their $2,000 shoes. Fish camps. Abandoned trailers. Places where people don't ask for IDs because they're all running from something, too. I sat under the flickering light of a single bulb in a shack that smelled of salt and gasoline. I had a burner phone and a map. I was planning a dismantling. Sterling had the law. Sarah had the skills. Marcus had the name. But I had the one thing they all lacked. I knew their secrets, and they thought I was dead. The news was already reporting a tragic explosion at a research facility. No mention of me. No mention of Marcus. They were erasing us so they could reset the board. You want to play the long game, Sterling? I whispered. Fine. Let's see how your investors feel when their safe attorney starts losing their money to a ghost. I started small. A whisper here. An anonymous tip there. I didn't go to the FBI. They're too slow, and Sterling has friends in high places. I went to the one group of people more ruthless than the Thorns, their competitors. I sent a single file from the drive, just one to the CEO of a rival real estate firm. A file that proved Marcus had been double-selling the same luxury condos in Miami to 3 different overseas investors. Then I called the one person I knew would be looking for blood. Lydia. Lydia, I said when she answered, my voice disguised by a voice modulator app. Marcus is in a private clinic. Sterling is the one who put him there. And Sterling is currently moving your jewelry assets into a Cayman account. If you want to keep your shiny things, you'll do exactly what I say. Lydia's greed was the perfect weapon. She didn't care about me. She didn't care about her brother. She cared about her status. Within an hour, she was calling every lawyer in Florida to freeze Sterling's access to the family trusts. The Thorn house was divided. Now, it was time to burn it down. The trap is set. I'm standing in the dark, watching the people who broke me turn on each other like starving wolves. If you've ever waited for the perfect moment to strike back at someone who did you wrong, you know the adrenaline that's pumping through me right now. Subscribe. Witness the fall of the Thorn dynasty. Because when the dust settles, you'll want to be on the side that's still standing. And for those who think I'm being too cruel, leave a comment. Tell me what you'd do to the man who tried to bury you alive. I looked at the drive one last time before burying it in a waterproof jar beneath a cypress tree. I didn't need it anymore. The fire was already spreading. But as I turned to leave the swamp, a red laser dot appeared on the center of my chest. You should have stayed in the water, Elena, a familiar voice said from the trees. It was Sarah. And she wasn't alone. You can run from a person. You can run from a debt. But you can never run from a ghost you thought you knew. The red dot on my chest was steady. It didn't flicker with the wind or the rain. It was as cold and precise as the woman holding the rifle. Sarah Vance stood 20 feet away, dressed in tactical black, looking less like a private investigator and more like a reaper. Don't move, Elena, she said. Her voice wasn't mocking. It was professional. And that was worse. I know where you buried the jar. I saw you from the ridge. Why, Sarah? I choked out, my hands slowly rising. You already got your check from Sterling. You won. Why are you still hunting me? You think this is about Sterling? Sarah stepped into the moonlight. Behind her, 3 men emerged from the cypress knees, their faces obscured by night vision goggles. Sterling is a middleman. He's a glorified paper pusher who got lucky. I don't work for him. I never did. I felt the world shift again. My head was spinning. Then who? Who could be bigger than the Thorn estate? The estate isn't the prize, Elena, Sarah said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The siren didn't just have money laundering ledgers on it. It had the blueprints for a localized EMP weapon, something Elias's company was developing for the highest bidder before the government shut them down. That's why the yacht was sabotaged. Not for insurance, to keep that tech from hitting the black market. And now, she continued, you have the digital keys to the server that contains the final encryption codes. Sterling thinks he's getting rich. My employers? They're getting powerful. My mother. She wasn't just a casualty of Marcus's greed. She was a witness to a global arms deal. She was a housekeeper who saw a folder she wasn't supposed to see. My mother didn't die in an accident, I whispered, the rage finally bubbling over the fear. You killed her. Your people. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Sarah said, and for the first time a flicker of something regret, guilt, crossed her face. Just like you are now. Wait, I said, my mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour. If you kill me, you'll never get the codes. I didn't bury the drive in that jar. Sarah froze. The laser dot wavered. I saw you, Elena. I watched you put it in the ground. You saw me put a jar in the ground, I said, a desperate, wild smile spreading across my face. Just like Sterling saw me throw the drive into the intake. I'm the girl from the trailer park, remember? We learn how to palm a coin before we learn how to read. The real drive is already on its way to the one person you can't touch. Who? Sarah hissed. Lydia Thorne, I lied. It was a gamble. A massive, suicidal bluff. She's greedy, she's vengeful, and she's already at the FBI office in Miami. If I don't check in with her in 10 minutes, she hands them everything. Blueprints, encryption, and your face on every most wanted list in the country. It was a local swamp tour boat. I had called using the burner phone's SOS feature right before Sarah appeared. But in the dark, with a spotlight blinding everyone, it looked like a raid. Contact, one of the men behind Sarah shouted. In the confusion, I ran toward the water. The water was cold, thick with silt and the rot of the Everglades. I dove deep, my lungs screaming, my ribs feeling like they were being hammered from the inside. I felt a bullet hiss through the water inches from my leg, the cavitation bubbles stinging my skin. I didn't swim for the boat. I swam under the muck, toward the root system of a massive, ancient mangrove. I stayed under until the world turned gray, until the bubbles in my lungs felt like fire. I broke the surface under the canopy of the roots, hidden by the shadows. I watched as the spotlight from the tour boat washed over Sarah and her men. They were retreating, disappearing back into the tree line. They couldn't risk a confrontation with witnesses. I was alone. I was bleeding. I was half drowned. But as I pulled myself onto a muddy bank, I reached into my hair. Tucked into the tight bun I'd tied before the escape, wrapped in a waterproof surgical glove, was the real drive. Sarah made a mistake. She thought this was about blueprints. She thought this was about power. She forgot that for me, this is about my mother. I'm not playing chess anymore. I'm burning the board. I opened the burner phone. One new message. I'm out of surgery. And I know where you are. We have a common enemy now, Elena. Let's finish this. Marcus. The man who tried to kill me is the only one who can help me stay alive. Trust is a luxury for people who still have something to lose. For me, it was a dead currency. But Marcus Thorne. He wasn't asking for trust. He was asking for survival. We met in a derelict boathouse on the edge of the Loxahatchee River. Marcus looked like a shadow of the man who had stepped over my body at the crash site. His leg was heavily bandaged, his face sallow, and his eyes. For the first time, they weren't filled with arrogance. They were filled with the terrified clarity of a man who realized he was no longer the apex predator. Sterling took everything, Elena, Marcus rasped, leaning against a rusted workbench. My accounts, my reputation, my father's legacy. He's liquidating the Thorne assets to fund Sarah's employers. By tomorrow morning, the Thorne name won't exist. It'll just be a footnote in a private equity takeover. And why should I care? I asked, my hand resting on the knife I'd tucked into my belt. You killed my mother, Marcus. You sabotaged that boat. I didn't, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I wanted the insurance money, yes. I tampered with the ledger. But the engine? The explosion? That was Sarah. She was already working for them back then. My father knew. That's why he didn't tell the police. He knew if he went after them, they'd wipe out the entire family. He was protecting us. In his own twisted, cowardly way. I didn't believe him. Not entirely. But I knew one thing. Marcus knew the layout of the Thorn International Tower in Miami. And that was where Sterling was headed to finalize the transfer of the encryption codes. Sterling has a physical master key in his private vault, Marcus said, pointing to the 50th floor of the blueprints. The digital drive you have? It's half the bridge. Without that physical key, the data is useless. He's going to combine them tonight at 11 p.m. If he succeeds, the EMP blueprints are gone, and so are we. How do we get in? I asked. The tower is a fortress. We don't go through the lobby, Marcus smirked, a flash of his old self returning. We go through the service elevator. The one my father installed for his private guests. The codes haven't been changed in 20 years because only 3 people knew they existed. My father, me, and the girl who cared for him. My birthday, that was the code. Elias had told me once that the day I started working for him was the day his real life began. I thought it was a senile old man's sentiment. Now I realized it was a tactical inheritance. At 10:30 p.m., the Miami skyline was a crown of neon and glass. We stood on the roof of the adjacent parking garage. Marcus was limping, but he was armed. I had the drive and a heart full of cold, black iron. We crossed the maintenance bridge, a narrow strip of metal suspended 500 feet above the pavement. The wind tried to pull me off the edge, but I welcomed it. I wanted to feel the danger. I wanted it to remind me that I was still alive. The service door hissed open. The interior of the Thorn Tower was silent, smelling of expensive floor wax and stale air conditioning. We moved like shadows through the executive corridors. Wait, Marcus whispered, pulling me into a recessed doorway. Around the corner, 2 of Sarah's tactical guards were patrolling the vault entrance. They weren't rent-a-cops. They had suppressed rifles and thermal goggles. I'll draw them off, Marcus said. You can barely walk, I hissed. Which makes me the perfect distraction. They'll think I'm a desperate man trying to reclaim his throne. While they're hunting me, you go through the HVAC crawlspace. It leads directly into Sterling's office. He looked at me then, not as the help but as a partner. Elena, he said, if I don't make it, burn it all. Don't let them have a single bite of my father's work. Marcus moved toward the guards, his silhouette limping into the light. I didn't look back. I climbed into the vent, the metal cold against my skin. I crawled through the darkness, the sound of my own breathing echoing in the tight space. I reached the grate above Sterling's office. I looked down. Sterling was sitting at his desk. He looked triumphant. Beside him stood Sarah, her arms crossed, watching a progress bar on a massive wall-mounted monitor. The master key, a sleek, silver device, was plugged into the console. The upload is at 80%, Sarah said. Where is the girl? She's dead in a swamp, Sarah. Sterling said, pouring a glass of Elias's favorite cognac. And Marcus is currently being neutralized by your team. By midnight, we are the new architects of the Thorn legacy. I kicked the grate open. I descended on a repelling wire I'd taken from Marcus's kit. I landed on the desk, the glass shattering under my boots. Sterling fell backward, his drink splashing across his silk tie. Sarah reached for her sidearm, but I was faster. I pulled the fire suppression manual override. I grabbed the master key from the console. The alarms were screaming. Sarah was gasping, her hand clawing at her throat. But as I turned to the window to make my escape, the door to the office exploded. It was a man I hadn't seen in 3 years. The man my mother was supposed to be working for the night she died. Give me the key, Elena, he said. Or I show you what really happened to your mother. They say the truth will set you free. But they never mention that the truth is a fire. It doesn't just light the way. It burns everything you ever loved until all that's left is ash and bone. I stood on the shattered desk, the silver master key clutched in my hand like a holy relic. Through the fog of the halon gas, the figure in the doorway looked like a phantom. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a tuxedo. It was Julian Vane. The man I had called in the motel. The man I thought was Marcus's rival. The man my mother had worked for as a private chef for 10 years. Julian? I whispered, my voice distorted by the mask. Elena, he said, stepping into the room. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was holding a small, pressurized oxygen canister to his face, taking a calm, measured breath. You look just like her. Especially when you're angry. My heart was a lead weight in my chest. You were behind all of this? Not Sterling. Not the Thorns. Elias Thorne was a genius, but he was a sentimental fool, Vane said, walking toward me with the grace of a panther. He thought he could hide the EMP blueprints on a yacht and call it a safety measure. My family invested millions into that tech. When the government pulled the plug, Elias tried to bury our investment. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed her. You killed my mother to get to the boat. I didn't want her to die, Elena, Vane said, and for a second, he actually sounded sincere. She was a witness. She saw the transfer. She saw Marcus tampering with the engine. She tried to stop him, and in the chaos, the boat went down earlier than planned. I spent 20 years waiting for the technology to catch up so I could go back down and get what was mine. I pulled the mask off. The air was thin, smelling of chemicals, but I needed to look him in the eye. You used me, I breathed. You let me work for Elias. You let me watch him die. You were the one who suggested me for the job 3 years ago, weren't you? Who better to watch a dying man than the daughter of the woman he felt most guilty about? Vane smiled. It was a beautiful, terrifying smile. I knew Elias would try to make amends. I knew he'd leave you the keys to the kingdom. I just had to wait for you to open the door. Every memory of the last 3 years felt like a lie. Every late-night conversation with Elias, every hand I held, every tear I shed for that old man, it was all scripted. I wasn't a caretaker. I was a bloodhound, trained from birth to find the scent of a secret I didn't even know existed. Give me the key, Elena, Vane said, extending his hand. Sterling is a cockroach. Sarah is a mercenary. But I was your mother's friend. I can make sure you never have to work a day in your life. 10 million? That's pocket change. I'll give you 100. I'll give you a new name. A new life. I looked at the master key. Then I looked at Sterling, who was gasping for air on the floor, and Sarah, who was unconscious. Then I looked at the man who had pretended to be my mother's benefactor while he orchestrated her drowning. My mother didn't want $100 million, Julian, I said, my voice vibrating with a rage so pure it felt like ice. She wanted to come home. She wanted to see me graduate. She wanted to grow old. I stepped off the desk, glass crunching under my boots. You think you can buy the silence you forced on her? I'm offering you a way out, Elena. Look around you. You're in a room full of corpses and criminals. Who do you think the police will believe? The billionaire philanthropist? Or the unstable girl with a history of elder abuse charges? He was right. That was the most painful part. He had the power to rewrite the world. But I had something he didn't. I had the drive. And I had the master key. I didn't hand him the key. I walked to the edge of the floor-to-ceiling window, the one shattered by the Halon blast. If the blueprints are so valuable, Julian, I said, holding the key over the 50-story drop, I wonder how much they're worth in 1,000 pieces on Biscayne Boulevard. Elena, don't. Vane lunged forward. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the black SUV pulling up to the curb 50 floors below. It was the FBI. And they weren't there for me. I thought the FBI were the cavalry. I thought their arrival meant the end of the nightmare. But in the world of the Thorns and the Vanes, the law isn't a shield, it's a vacuum cleaner. It doesn't care who's right. It only cares about who's left to take the fall. Julian Vane didn't flinch at the sirens. He didn't look at the window. He looked at me, his eyes cold and calculating even as the red and blue lights danced across his tuxedo. You think they're here for me, Elena? Vane said, his voice barely audible over the growing roar of the helicopters. I'm the one who called them. I reported a terrorist threat, an unstable former employee holding the Thorn Tower hostage with stolen government tech. They have orders to terminate the threat on sight. Give me the key, and I'll tell them you're a witness I've secured. If you don't, you're just another body in a tragic office shooting. I looked down at the street. The black SUVs were spilling out agents in tactical gear, but I saw something Vane didn't. I saw the lead agent, a woman with a familiar, sharp gait. It was Sarah's sister. Or someone who looked exactly like her. The corruption didn't end at the Thorn Gate. It went all the way to the top. This wasn't a raid. It was a retrieval mission. They weren't here to arrest Vane. They were here to clean the room and take the EMP data back into the shadows. I'm not dying for your blueprints, Julian, I hissed. I didn't drop the key. I shoved it into my mouth. I know, it sounds insane. But in that moment, I realized it was the only way to ensure they didn't just kill me and pry it from my cold fingers. If I swallowed it, I became the vault. I didn't wait for them to aim. I turned toward the shattered window. Elena, no! Vana screamed. I didn't jump into the abyss. I jumped for the maintenance gondola, the window-washing platform that had been stuck 3 floors down since the Hallen blast. The impact sent a shockwave through my already broken ribs. I rolled onto the grimy metal floor of the gondola, gasping for air that tasted like copper and smoke. Above me, the silhouettes of tactical teams appeared at the window. I fumbled for the control box. It was dead. I looked at the cables. They were frayed, sparking from the electrical surge I'd caused in the server room. God, please, I whispered, grabbing a manual release lever. The gondola dropped. Not a controlled descent, a freefall. Narrator, I was pinned against the safety rail, looking straight down at the headlights 400 feet below. The gondola was swinging wildly, hitting the side of the glass building with a sickening crunch every few seconds. I looked up. A sniper was leaning out of the 50th floor window, adjusting his scope. He had a clear shot. I was a sitting duck in a metal cage. But then, the building itself groaned. The Hallen gas hadn't just put out the fire. The pressure change, combined with the electrical arc I triggered, had caused a structural failure in the main server spine. The glass above me began to shatter, not in shards, but in a tidal wave of crystalline death. The cable snapped. Not the safety cable, the main one. The gondola plummeted toward the 30th floor balcony. I braced for the impact, closing my eyes, waiting for the darkness to finally take me. But as the metal crumpled around me, a hand reached through the debris. I told you, we finish this together, the voice said. It was Marcus. But his face was covered in blood, and he was holding a detonator. The tower isn't just a building, Elena. It's a bomb, and I just started the countdown. They say the most dangerous place to be is in the eye of a hurricane. It's quiet there. It's peaceful. But it's a lie. The silence is just the storm catching its breath before it tears you apart. Marcus Thorne sat propped against a concrete pillar on the 30th floor balcony, his hands slick with blood as he clutched the detonator. He looked like a man who had already died and was just waiting for his body to get the memo. I lay in the wreckage of the window-washing gondola, my vision swimming, the silver master key still a cold, metallic weight in the back of my throat. You're going to blow up the tower? I choked out, spitting blood onto the marble floor. There are people in here, Marcus. Innocent people. The building was evacuated 20 minutes ago, Elena, Marcus rasped, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. When the Hallen went off, the official security cleared the floors. The only people left in this tower are Sterling, Vane, their mercenaries, and us. But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it for revenge. I'm doing it because of what my father actually built under our feet. I looked at him, confused. The EMP blueprints? The money laundering? That was the surface, Elena. That was the rabbit for the hounds. My father didn't care about weapons. He cared about legacy. Marcus coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Underneath the foundation of this tower isn't just dirt. It's the Thorne data vault. It's a cold storage server that contains the encrypted records of every politician, judge, and federal agent the Thorne family has assisted for the last 50 years. The real power. It isn't money. It's leverage, Marcus whispered. The EMP blueprints were the distraction to keep the government looking for tech. But the data in that vault? It would dismantle the entire power structure of the East Coast. That's why Vane is here. He doesn't want to sell a weapon. He wants to be the weapon. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The master key I had swallowed, it wasn't just for the blueprints. It was the password for the blackmail of an entire nation. Elias Thorne hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me the most dangerous secret in history. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. He handed it to me with a trembling hand. It was a photo of my mother. She was standing on the deck of the Siren, laughing, holding a young boy's hand. The boy wasn't me. It was Marcus. She wasn't just the help, Elena, Marcus said, his eyes filling with a rare, genuine grief. She was my father's mistress. For 10 years, she was the only person who could calm the monster in him. She was the one who convinced him to stop the arms deals, to use his power for something better. That's why Vane killed her. Not because she was a witness. Because she was the only one who could get my father to destroy the vault. She was the threat to their system. My mother didn't die for a folder. She died for a conscience. She died because she tried to make a bad man good. And me? I whispered. Why did he bring me here? Because you're his daughter, Elena, Marcus said, the words hitting me harder than the fall from the 50th floor. You're not the help. You're my sister. And you're the only thorn left with a soul clean enough to decide if this legacy should exist or burn. The revelation didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel hollow. Every insult Lydia threw, every adequate from Marcus, every hour I spent cleaning floors, it was all a sick, twisted test by a father who was too cowardly to claim me while he was alive. They're coming, Marcus said, looking at the stairwell door. Vane and his team. They'll be here in minutes. You have the key, Elena. You can give it to them and become the most powerful woman in the world. Or you can give me the word, and I press this button. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the detonator. Then I felt the master key in my throat. I didn't spit it out. Don't press it yet, I said, standing up and wiping the blood from my chin. I want Vane to see my face when I do it. I want him to know exactly which nobody is taking him down. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before a predator strikes. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of intent. Julian Vane stepped through the smoke of the breached doorway. He wasn't the polished philanthropist anymore. His tuxedo was torn, his face was smudged with soot, and he held a submachine gun with the casual familiarity of a man who had spent his youth in war zones before he spent his adulthood in boardrooms. Behind him, Sarah and 3 of her mercenaries fanned out, their red laser sights dancing across the wreckage like hungry insects. It's over, Elena, Vane said, his voice straining to stay calm. The tower is surrounded. The federal extraction team is on the roof. Give me the key, and I might still let you walk out of here as a tragic survivor. I stood in front of Marcus, shielding his broken body with my own. You're late, Julian, I said. I reached into my throat, gagging slightly, and pulled out the silver master key. It was slick with blood, shimmering under the strobe lights of the emergency system. I've already seen the vault. I know about the leverage. I know who I am. Vane's eyes locked onto the key. His greed was a physical thing, a pulse in his temple. Then you know that key is the only thing keeping you alive. Vane hissed. Without it, you're just a girl who knows too much. With it, you're a thorn. You could have everything your father had. More. Everything he had? I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed off the glass walls. He had a daughter he was ashamed of. He had a son who tried to poison him. He had a friend who murdered the woman he loved. I don't want his life, Julian. I want his justice. I turned the key over in my hand. You said this was a retrieval mission. But you forgot one thing about the Thorn data vault. It's not just a library. It's a dead man's switch for the entire building's infrastructure. I didn't drop the key. I slammed it into the maintenance port of the gondola's backup control panel, right at my feet. What are you doing? Sarah yelled, her finger tightening on her trigger. I'm not blowing the building, Sarah, I said, looking directly at her. Marcus was wrong about the detonator. My father didn't want to destroy the data, he wanted to release it. On the giant monitors that lined the 30th floor lobby, windows began to pop open. Not blueprints, not encryption codes. Names, dates, bank account numbers of senators, video clips of Vane meeting with cartel leaders in the 90 seconds. The leverage wasn't being downloaded, it was being live-streamed to every major news outlet in the world through the tower's emergency broadcast array. No. Vane screamed, lunging forward. It wasn't me who fired, it was Sarah. She didn't shoot me. She shot the 2 mercenaries standing next to her. Before Vane could turn, she had her barrel pressed against the back of his head. The check cleared, Julian, Sarah said, her voice as cold as the Atlantic. But Elena was right. You're a liability now. And I don't work for liabilities. I watched as the man who destroyed my life fell to his knees, not because of a bullet, but because he was watching his empire evaporate in real time on the screens behind me. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a piece of data. A ghost. Get him out of here, I told Sarah. Give him to the real FBI agents outside. The ones who aren't on his payroll. I've already sent them the GPS coordinates of the mercenary camp in the Keys. Sarah looked at me, a flicker of respect or perhaps fear in her eyes. She nodded, dragging a broken, sobbing Vane toward the stairs. I knelt next to Marcus. His breathing was shallow. He looked at the screens, a small, sad smile on his face. You did it, sis, he whispered. You burned the throne. We did it, I said. But as I reached for his hand, the tower groaned again. A deeper, more structural sound. Marcus hadn't been lying about the detonator. The stream was the distraction. The explosion was still coming. And we were still on the 30th floor. They say that when a house of cards falls, the sound is deafening. But when a dynasty dies, it's quiet. It's the sound of a long-held breath finally being let go. The tower didn't collapse into the street. Marcus hadn't rigged the pillars to kill. He'd rigged the server core to melt. The explosion I heard was the sound of millions of dollars of hardware turning into slag, ensuring that once the stream was over, there would be no backups, no recovery, and no second chances for the secrets of the Thorne family. I sat on the edge of the balcony, my legs dangling over the side. The Florida sun was beginning to peek over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. It was beautiful. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't looking at the clock to see when Elias needed his next pill. I wasn't looking over my shoulder for Marcus's shadow. Marcus was still breathing, though barely. The paramedics had reached us 10 minutes ago, and as they loaded him onto the stretcher, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. Go? Elena? He whispered, his voice a ghost of the man who had tried to frame me. The FBI. They'll want to talk to the witness. Don't be there when they arrive. Be the ghost they think you are. Why are you helping me now, Marcus? I asked. He looked at the sunrise, a tear tracking through the blood on his cheek. Because for 3 years, you were the only one who didn't want anything from him. Not the money. Not the power. You just wanted him to be comfortable. I think I'm jealous of that. I watched them take him away. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't forgive him either. He was just a man broken by a legacy that was never meant for human shoulders to carry. I walked through the lobby of the tower one last time. The marble was covered in glass shards and soot. On the wall hung a portrait of Elias Thorne, the one where he looked powerful, stern, and immortal. I stopped in front of it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last thing I had left of him. Not a key. Not a drive. It was a small, dried sprig of mint I'd taken from the kitchen before the tower fell. You won, Elias. I whispered to the portrait. You destroyed them all. But you didn't do it for justice. You did it because you couldn't stand the thought of anyone else holding the leash. I dropped the mint on the floor and walked out the front doors. I didn't take the $10 million. I didn't take the Thorne name. I had Sarah's sister who turned out to be an honest investigator working with the real federal task force wire the liquid assets into a blind trust for the families of the people on the siren. My mother's name was at the top of the list. I spent 3 years caring for a billionaire, and I learned one thing: wealth isn't about what you have in the bank. It's about what you're allowed to forget. The Thornes forgot they were human. They forgot that every dollar has a face and every secret has a price. I'm standing on a pier now, back in Sarasota. The air doesn't smell like ash anymore, it smells like salt and possibilities. I'm still the help. But now, I'm helping myself. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, blue envelope. It had been mailed to my old apartment, forwarded 3 times. It was from the hospice nurse who was with Elias in his final hour, the 1 hour I wasn't in the room. I opened it. Inside was a single key to a safety deposit box in a small town I'd never heard of. One last thing, Elena, the note read. For when the fire goes out. We spend our lives looking for a happily ever after. We think it's a destination, a mansion on a hill, a bank account with enough zeros to drown out our fears. But after everything I've seen, the blood, the fire, the betrayal, I've realized that peace isn't the absence of war. It's the knowledge that you don't have to fight anymore. I stood in the small-town bank in northern Florida, miles away from the jagged glass and hollow promises of Miami. The air here didn't feel like ash. It felt like cedar and old paper. The clerk handed me the small metal box associated with Elias's final key and walked away, giving me the privacy the dead always seem to demand. I opened the lid. I expected another secret. Another weapon. Another burden. But the box was nearly empty. At the bottom of the box sat 2 things. The first was a deed. Not to a mansion, not to a tower. It was the deed to a small, 10-acre orange grove in the center of the state. A place called the Mother's Rest. The second was a letter. Not on legal stationery. It was written on a napkin from the diner where I used to buy Elias his favorite cherry pie when he was too sick to eat anything else. Elena, it read. By now you've likely burned my world down. I hope you did. I spent my life building a cage, and I called it an empire. I used people like stones to build a wall between myself and the truth. But in those 3 years you sat by my bed, you were the only thing that was real. You didn't stay because of the will, you didn't even know about it then. You stayed because you are what I could never be. You are kind. I felt a tear hit the paper. The money in the will was a test for my children. I knew they would fail. But this grove, this was for your mother. I bought it for her 20 years ago, but I was too much of a coward to give it to her. I let her stay, the help, because it was easier than being a man of honor. Don't be like me, Elena. Take the land, plant something that grows toward the light instead of digging in the dirt for secrets. Be free. I didn't go back for the Thorn name. I didn't check the news to see Vane's mugshot or Lydia's bankruptcy filing. I drove to that grove. I'm sitting on the porch of a small white house now. The sun is setting over the trees, and the smell of orange blossoms is so thick it feels like a hug from the mother I lost. I learned that justice isn't about making the bad guys suffer, though they did. Justice is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that the world tried to steal. Marcus, Lydia, Sterling, Vane. They were all prisoners of their own greed. I was the one in the uniform, the one cleaning the floors, but I was the only one who was actually free. They called me the help. And they were right. I helped the truth find the light. I helped a dying man find his conscience. And finally, I helped myself find a home. The Thorn legacy is gone. The tower is a hollow shell. But here under the Florida sun, something new is growing. My name is Elena. I am the daughter of a saint and the legacy of a sinner. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I belong. You've been with me. You've seen the depths of human greed and the heights of a daughter's love. If this story touched even a small part of your soul, then you know what you have to do. Subscribe. Not for me, but for the truth. Don't walk away and forget that the nobodies in this world are often the ones holding it together. Subscribe now, or live with the silence. And in the comments, tell me one thing you'd fight for if you lost everything. I'm reading. I'm waiting. And I'm finally home.